Allied warships and transports laden with U.S. Marines slip silently into the waters bordering the Solomons.
The headlines in America were all about Guadalcanal. And it's deep into the psyche of Americans as a result of that.
Surrender or be annihilated. No prisoners.
This was the first time America went on the offensive in the Second World War.
Somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people lost their lives on this island.
The Atlanta is a war grave, 157 souls lost aboard.
Very few people has ever dived her.
There's a tremendous amount of history down there.
Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. One of approximately 1,000 islands in this South Pacific nation. It was the site of one of the fiercest, bloodiest, and most important battles in the Pacific during the Second World War, known as the Battle of Guadalcanal. This Allied campaign against the Japanese raged on land and sea for nearly 6 months. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, which took place from November 13th to November 15th, 1942, was a strategic victory for the United States and its allies. But it was also one of the most chaotic naval battles of the war that resulted in the sinking of 13 U.S. Navy ships during this 3-day combat. The USS Atlanta, a light cruiser commissioned just weeks after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, was one of these ships. In May 2011, an international scuba diving expedition team arrives in the Solomon Islands to dive the wreck of the USS Atlanta. Liam Allen, an Irish diver living in nearby Australia, is the expedition's project leader.
This is a very unique part of the world, the Solomon Islands. Not only has Guadalcanal got some amazing history in terms of what occurred here during World War II, for us as divers, the diving is outstanding. It really is world class. The capital of the Solomon Islands is Honiara and situated on the island of Guadalcanal. And this is going to be our location for the duration of the project.
The wreck of the USS Atlanta is located at 130 meters or 426 feet below the surface. An ambitious dive for even the most experienced technical diver.
It is a very challenging dive. It is extremely deep, and we plan to spend some long bottom times on it. But physically, I believe everybody's in shape. Mentally, everybody is prepared for it.
In 1992, the wreck of the USS Atlanta was discovered using a remotely operated vehicle by Dr. Robert Ballard, famous for his discovery of the RMS Titanic. But because of severe ocean conditions, his expedition was unable to produce conclusive results about the Atlanta's physical state. Shortly after Ballard's discovery, a small number of divers from Australia and the United States mounted expeditions to the Atlanta in the 1990s. The reports and footage obtained from these early dives indicated that the Atlanta wreck was worth further investigation. The team had their first project briefing and planned for a week of diving.
It's great to see everybody here. You guys have made journeys from all corners of the globe. Building up to this project, we've had many different accounts of what condition the wreck is in. We've also had some varying reports about the visibility on the bottom, the currents, so the environmental factors that we're going to be faced with. One of the ways in determining what way the wreck is lying and an overview of the wreck is to use a side scan sonar. The advantage in using this side scan will give us a general overview of the wreck in order for us to get an idea as to what to expect.
We're all keenly aware that the Atlanta is a war grave, 157 souls lost aboard. As with any situation, we're always going into these wrecks with respect, but in a war grave situation, there's even the next layer of respect that we want to manage. We want to be sensitive to the relatives, being sure that we treat this situation, this wreck and her history with integrity. That's kind of standard operating principle, but given the history of Atlanta, it bears repeating.
The dive team is made up of highly experienced divers who have broken world records, made fascinating underwater discoveries, and are dedicated to conservation and preservation of the aquatic realm. Jared Jablonski and Casey McKinley, the two American divers on the team, hold the world record for the longest cave dive, a 28-hour underwater journey that began at the entrance of Wakulla Springs in Florida. At a depth of 300 feet, the two divers explored more than 5 miles into the aquifer and returned with critical data needed for springs conservation and protection.
Atlanta is one of the interesting scenarios. A lot of times we're looking to kind of solve a mystery, but our goal would really be to look over the wreck and identify any uniqueness, and more importantly, to try to bring back the memory and the history of Atlanta to people around the world.
The reason why I wanted to dive her in the first place is that it's a big capital warship. It has an interesting story to me. It's a challenge to dive it because it's deep, and very few people has ever dived her. And I have not seen any good video footage of that wreck.
Richard Lundgren, an avid wreck diver from Sweden, spent over 20 years combing the Baltic Sea to locate the 16th century Swedish warship Mars, the lead ship of Eric XIV's naval fleet. In 2011, his expedition team believed that they had at last found the Mars. Additional dives to the wreck allowed the team to confirm their amazing discovery.
I've always been fascinated with military history, and for the last probably 10, 11 years, one of the main points of my personal research and interest was always a war in the Pacific. When Liam asked me if I want to go for the project, close to 3 years ago, I said definitely yes.
If you look back to history, it's been so hammered up by both sides that it can be either a beautiful wreck or it can be like a pile of iron rubbish.
From the office of Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet, go orders for new attacks upon the Japanese. The massing of Allied sea power to crush the enemy in the Central Pacific.
Ahead of the project over the past couple of months, I actually did some research on the battle here on Guadalcanal. And I think a lot of the history and the movies speaks to the battle that actually took place on land. The Marines holding Henderson Field, which as an American was extremely important for the World War II campaign. At the same time, I don't think as much emphasis has been placed on the naval battle of Guadalcanal, which I think is a story that needs to be told as well because of the chaotic nature of it, and Atlanta being one of the casualties.
We were around 21 and much younger, and we just didn't understand what war was. Of course, it only takes one battle. You learn real fast.
Well, I always wanted to do a head snuckle Sam's Navy, so I joined the Navy.
When it come out in the newspaper showing a picture of the cruiser Atlanta, advertising that Georgia boys could enlist for that particular ship. So I got off from work, went downtown to the recruiting office, walked in, I said, I want to join the Navy. And the emergency was in effect at that time. And in as much as say, what's your name? Hold your hand up. Okay, you're in the Navy.
Uncle Sam's big two-ocean Navy program comes one step nearer completion as the USS Atlanta is launched by Margaret Mitchell, authoress of Gone with the Wind. And another bottle of champagne goes with the wind as the cruiser becomes the 200...
The USS Atlanta was the first of a new class of ships designed to provide anti-aircraft protection for U.S. naval task groups. Built by the Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Kearney, New Jersey in 1941, she became the third Navy ship named after the city of Atlanta, Georgia.
Anyone walking by her, they were all admiring her. She was a centerpiece, there's no doubt about that.
Well, this is a beauty, you know. We love the Atlanta. I felt it an honor, you know, to get to serve on it. And it was the first of its class of anti-aircraft cruisers.
In the winter of 1942, the USS Atlanta left the east coast of the United States bound for Hawaii's Pearl Harbor. In May 1942, the ship was given orders to sail to the North Pacific, joining Vice Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 16, formed around the USS Enterprise and USS Hornet. Under the command of Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, the USS Atlanta participated in the Battle of Midway, its first naval combat. The Battle of Midway was a major victory for the Allies against the Japanese and was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. In spite of the success of Midway, the Japanese still tried to advance in the South Pacific. The Allies understood that a massive task force was needed in the Solomon Islands in order to neutralize the Japanese Army and Navy. The task force eventually became the Solomon Islands Campaign.
American troop transports and other craft approached Guadalcanal in the Solomons for the initial landing on the strategic Pacific island.
The Solomon Islands was a British protectorate before World War II. But on May 3, 1942, the Japanese captured Tulagi Island and proceeded to build an airfield on Guadalcanal. When the Allies became aware of this airfield, they decided to act. On August 7, 1942, the Americans surprised the Japanese and took control of the airfield.
The Battle of Guadalcanal lasted 6 months, and in fact was the longest battle Americans were involved in the Second World War. And indeed, this was the first time America went on the offensive in the Second World War. And it's often referred to as the first offensive. From August till November, this was where Americans were fighting in the Second World War. They didn't get involved in Europe until November 1942.
The Atlanta was involved from a support position. It was screening aircraft carriers whose planes were used to bomb Guadalcanal. Once the Americans captured the airfield and renamed it Henderson Field, it was a little hard for the Japanese to reinforce it during the day. So they would send ships down at night to reinforce it.
Japanese were primarily there to bombard the airfield so they could land more men from transports.
They would come down at night. There were a whole series of naval battles. Japanese had some losses, but they were pretty much victories for them.
In the afternoon of November 12, 1942, the Allies were warned that the Japanese planned to bombard the island again. Upon hearing the news, the Atlanta escorted the cargo ships away from Guadalcanal and then turned back to meet the battle group.
We got word there was 6 or 8 Jap warships headed to Guadalcanal. And well, we had 13 ships, and we were to intercept. And well, we felt quite confident, 13 against 6 or 8, you know. What we didn't know, that the Japs were sending in 34 warships.
They had everything from battleships to heavy cruisers and destroyers.
Due to a series of just confusing actions and orders being misinterpreted, and as things happen at night in the middle of the ocean where it's pitch black, the two forces basically just collided, literally. And nobody opened fire until maybe the closest distance was about 2,000 yards, 3,500 yards. Some of the ships came so close that some destroyers were literally scraping along the side of some of the Japanese ships. I mean, that's how close they were.
They saw the Japanese ships coming, but somehow, instead of making a T, where you can broadside onto the approaching enemy, they made it into an X. And it became ships firing at each other.
The Japanese decided to turn their searchlights on, and the Atlanta was one of the first ships that they saw.
Lit us up like a Christmas tree. We knew at that time that they were looking down the barrel at us and they was fixing to blow us out of the water. We weren't supposed to do anything until our senior admiral, who was on the San Francisco to the rear of the Atlanta, gave us permission to do.
Rear Admiral Norman Scott was on the Atlanta, and Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, who was in charge of the battle, was on the USS San Francisco.
We had never been hit, so we were quite anxious. Because it was pitch dark. You tried to identify what you were shooting at, but you didn't always identify correctly.
The USS Atlanta fired at the Japanese battleship Hiei and the destroyer Akatsuki. The shelling severely damaged the Akatsuki, but as it began to sink, it fired 2 torpedoes, which plowed into the Atlanta.
The one that hit up by the bow, thank goodness it failed to detonate. But the one that hit midship did detonate, and it seemed like it kind of picked the ship up.
Both my father and my uncle served aboard the ship. They were both involved in that naval battle. I remember my father telling me that the torpedo hit and it literally lifted the ship out of the water. He felt it come up and then just hit back down again. He said right after that point, a shell must have hit the handling room where he was, and the explosion killed everybody in the handling room except for him. It blew his shoes off and blew the buttons off his shirt. He got wounded, had a big piece of shrapnel in his back, and he was unconscious. The torpedo was only the beginning of the horror for the ship. As it drifted out of the battle line, the San Francisco, which was a heavy cruiser, 8-inch shells, were firing on some other ships, and either the Atlanta drifted into the line of fire, or they mistook the Atlanta for a Japanese ship, which doesn't really seem likely. The silhouette was very, very different. The battle was described by one of the officers who were involved in it as basically a barroom brawl after somebody shot the lights out. You just know who you were shooting at.
The officers in charge of the firing were told by these enlisted men not to fire on that ship, that it was a friendly ship. I mean, we were all just sailors, we weren't officers. But we had been trained to identify, and these boys identified it as a friendly ship, and but the officers wouldn't listen. And the story goes that one of the enlisted men kicked one of the officers, and that was when they quit firing on us.
The USS Atlanta suffered harsh damage because of the hits it received from the USS San Francisco.
When all was said and done, out of the 8 turrets, only 1 turret was left operational, so everything was basically destroyed topside on the ship.
We were dead in the water, sitting there burning from bow to stern practically. We identified 19 shells from one of our own cruisers. I was scared to death. And I think everybody in the gun turret was. Men within a few feet of me, they got splattered. Like the young boy that was hanging over, didn't have a head and just a big hole between his shoulders.
The official number killed on board was 173 men, including Admiral Scott and his staff. The Atlanta's Captain Jenkins was wounded. Because the USS Atlanta was drifting toward the Japanese-held part of the island, they dropped their starboard anchor. A tugboat came to tow the Atlanta back to Tulagi Island, opposite Guadalcanal.
The towing was very slow because the anchor was dragging and the ship was just in horrific condition.
Rather than allow the Atlanta to fall into enemy hands, a decision was made to scuttle the ship.
They took all the dead and they put them in bunks in a couple of compartments, so to give them a proper burial, a proper respectful burial.
At the last moment, they discovered that there was 2 fellas in there were still breathing, but they was fixing to be left in there, but they got those 2 out.
Well, after we made the demolition charge, we abandoned ship. When they moved away, and the captain was the last to leave, and he had an extended cord to put that together, you know, to set off the charge. So I didn't want to see it go down. The place had been my home for the past 10.5 months.
In terms of my father, they took a lot of the survivors from the ship, and even though he was wounded, they put them on the beachhead on Guadalcanal because they were expecting an invasion from the next bombardment force that was coming down. So they stuck them in a foxhole with a .50 caliber machine gun after going through all that horrific experience. That evening, the second naval battle that took place was actually another epic battle. They wound up sinking the Japanese battleship that night. But I remember my father telling me that sitting in his foxhole on the beachhead, that you can actually see the battle at night going on out in the distance, and you can see the shells going back and forth. So you saw this just enormous battle raging out there. So the whole experience itself just must have been, you know, something very horrific.
The Japanese were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempts to bomb and recapture Henderson Field.
Fortunately, they didn't get to the beach because our 2 main battleships and 4 destroyers intercepted them.
Although the naval battle of Guadalcanal was over, the battle on land intensified.
This plaque was laid here to commemorate those lives that have been lost during the Guadalcanal campaign. Over here in this corner, you can see Savo Island, which is just out in front of us. In Savo Island, there was quite a historical battle there, the Battle of Savo Island, and there's quite a number of ships out in this region. This stretch of water received the nickname Iron Bottom Sound. The sound itself is extremely deep. There are more than 200 ships here, but unfortunately not many of them are within diving depth range. The Atlanta itself is just within diving depth range. It's lying in 130 meters of water. We've been building up quite extensively for this dive. We're extremely excited and looking forward to the opportunity in diving it. However, at the same time, it is also going to be a very sobering experience due to the fact that there's still 157 souls still on board. Today we plan to take out the side-scan sonar. Basically a side-scan sonar bounces the sound waves off the bottom of the ocean in order to give an indication as to what's down there.
The nice thing about the side-scan sonar is that it will actually give us an idea and a picture of the wreck before we're diving it. Richard Lundgren, he's very familiar with the usage of such a system. We will set it up and go over the wreck a couple of times and see what we can see. It will help us tremendously if we have an idea what the condition of the wreck is, if it's broken up in several pieces, what the depth is. The sonar system like this can be so detailed that if you put like a soda can on the bottom, you would be able to make it out. I mean, that's remarkable.
The dive team have located the wreck of the USS Atlanta using a GPS.
Yep. 24 minutes.
Yep.
They prepare to launch the side-scan sonar into the water.
9.5.
The sonar itself, we call it a fish. It's in the water. We're dragging it about 200 meters behind the boat.
But the sonar does not respond, in spite of several attempts to communicate with it.
It's not sending us any information. That can be multiple reasons why that's not happening. It can be electronics, can be set up in the laptop, it can be the box which is in between, which is not communicating. Okay, this one is 6.310828. It will be really a pity for us if we can't get it to work. This will mean we will lose our eyes. That means the first dive that we're going to do will be a blind one.
the team decide to give it one more try and relaunch the side scan sonar.
Got cable? Okay, there we go. 200. Yeah, hold at 200.
At last, the side scan sonar is sending imagery, but is lacking detail.
I think we have a pretty good image of the sea bottom. It's a bit distorted. Now to the left, we have some wreckage. Maybe we're coming up to something here. Yeah, that's a wreck. That's the stern part of it. It looks all smashed out, actually. Now we're passing through the big hull. Can't see much of the superstructure, but it's laying on its port side, I can see. The stern also looks a bit beaten up here. If you look here up to the right, you can see the anchor chain.
Wait, you hold it, I can help.
We definitely have the orientation of the wreck, the direction in which he's lying in. We do know it's lying on our port side, but unfortunately we didn't get the detail we were after. However, sometimes by having too much information it takes away from the exploration aspect.
The first day of diving the USS Atlanta finally arrives, and the conditions are perfect.
Today, it's just a two-man team. Richard and I are going to drop down, and the objective is to tie in the anchor line or mooring line.
That means basically that we're gonna try to hit the wreck with an anchor from the boat. That's quite difficult because the wreck is 130 meters below the surface. We need that line to get down to the wreck and get up to the decompression platform in the end.
The first day of diving coincides with Richard's birthday.
Happy birthday, dear Richard. Happy birthday to you.
We're excited, we're nervous, a little bit of anticipation. Particularly, I feel quite a lot of it after inviting all these guys to come all the way to the Solomon Islands, and fingers crossed it's in good condition.
The feeling you have when you have waited for something for 15 years and actually go down there is very hard to describe, but it's excitement, it's intense, it's joy. All of these things mixed, but it's a healthy mix. So it makes you tense, but also very, very happy.
We plan to go and have a quick scout around the wreck. We're fortunate enough that we've got some underwater scooters with us. This will allow us to cover a relatively large area without any real effort. So while working at these sort of depths, it's important not to be working too aggressively.
After several hours of waiting for Richard and Liam to return from the dive, the team at last get feedback on the condition of the wreck.
When we came here, we heard rumors, both positive and negative rumors, of the state of the wreck. Some people claimed that it was just scrap metal down there. It was not worth diving. Now we know it's a beautiful wreck.
That's huge. We only saw like such a small section of it, but the bulk of it, the superstructure, is massive. Man. I thought it'd be a lot smaller. The first dive of the expedition was a success. Conditions are very nice out there. Visibility of the wreck from about 80 meters, so visibility down there is excellent. Came across onto the deck side and we scooted down towards the stern where the stern section is broken off. The most notable things we saw were the dual mount guns. Both guns are still pointing upwards.
We had a bottom time of roughly 15 to 17 minutes. Including decompression, the total dive time was about 3 hours.
For the rest of the expedition now, it means that we have a very secure downline, which means that every day we go out to the wreck, it's going to be a lot more efficient in terms of getting divers in the water and descending.
I look forward to dive this wreck for 15 years and to be able to do it on my birthday with my best friend Liam here. It was just a fantastic experience.
One of the big things that people don't realize, in addition to the diving that actually takes place, are all the logistics that have to occur out of the water, all the gas mixing and all the equipment preparation and making sure everything's analyzed.
Diving in deep water conditions creates a logistical problem because you consume a lot more gas due to the increased depth. So diving conventional scuba creates a problem in carrying enough gas.
In order to reduce the amount of gas that must be carried, the team is using rebreathers, a device that recycles the diver's breathing gas by removing the exhaled carbon dioxide and replacing a fraction of each breath with fresh breathing gas, greatly extending the diver's breathing gas supply and dive time compared to traditional scuba.
Rebreathers are more complex, but in the end of the day, clearly on deep dives like this, the additional risk associated with complexity of the unit is far outweighed by the ability to go down and not worry about the amount of gas you're consuming.
The team prepares for their second day of diving the USS Atlanta.
Considering what we saw yesterday, I'm extremely excited. The whole team is pumped up. We got perfect conditions again today, which is excellent for us. Total in-water time, we're looking at approximately 4.5 to 5 hours. So we're looking forward to a good day in the water.
Obviously, there was a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of nervousness as we first hit the water, but at around 80, 85 meters, the conditions were good, the currents were cooperating with us. Just to see that big hull sort of appear out of the darkness as we descended through 80 meters on our way to about 120 meter depth just really was exciting.
She's sitting somewhat magically on the bottom, waiting for people to come and appreciate her part in history.
And the teammates, we were just looking and started to scream underwater. It's a fantastic experience when this wreck just comes into view, and well, you just love it. Very intense.
The challenges of filming a wreck like this, they're multiple. It's pretty dark down there. We don't have a lot of ambient light. There's this dark, blue-like gloom which is going over the wreck. It's actually beautiful to see, but it's a challenge if you want to shoot it on film, because we have to bring a lot of lights.
One of the goals is to shoot video of the place where the Admiral lost his life when Atlanta was hit by friendly fires from San Francisco.
From the stern section, we can clearly see where the prop shaft comes out from the hull. And these are quite large diameter prop shafts, and there's an extremely big twist in the shaft itself. This would indicate that when it hit the bottom, it received some serious impact. At the end of the prop shafts, we have the propellers themselves, and both of these are still in place. We came across the torpedo tubes. Some nice features of that is the actual torpedoes are still inside the tubes themselves. And this would indicate that they weren't launched during the battle.
As we were heading forward on the wreck towards the bow area, we crossed over the battle stations and the bridge area. Both of those compartments of the wreck has been severely damaged. These areas are of course interesting because not only is this where the action took place during the battle, this is where the ship was commanded and so on, but this is also where the Admiral sadly lost his life in the end.
There's a tremendous amount of history down there, and all you have to do is swim around the wreck a little bit and see all the debris and the chaos that was part of that battle almost 70 years ago.
During the 6-month Guadalcanal campaign, the Americans and their allies lost over 7,000 men, while the Japanese lost over 30,000.
These guys, when they arrived, were boys, literally. They were average age of somebody coming to the Solomons at that time was about 18 years of age. Most of them had come from rural communities, off farms, never seen the ocean before, never seen a jungle before.
You can't live off a jungle. In the jungle, there are no coconut trees. There are no bananas. There's no fruits you can pick. Only an ant can live off the jungle. The Japanese, they weren't hungry, they were starving. They were tenacious. They never gave up. To get a surrendering Japanese was extremely rare. For the Americans, they wouldn't give up either. To surrender to the Japanese was certain death. Any American that was captured here was executed by the Japanese. Not one American survived being captured. They'd be interrogated and shot. And of those Japanese that died here, there's probably about 4,000 has been collected. They're still out there. When Americans have lost people around here, they have controlled the ground and therefore they retrieved their dead. So whilst they did have casualties, most of the skeletons you find here are Japanese.
The remains of 8 Japanese soldiers were recently found in the village of Barana. John meets with his friend, local villager Peter Bassi, to examine the newly found graves.
It's a lovely, peaceful village, but it had its moments in 1942 where it was sheer hell here.
During the war, this area was nicknamed Gifu by the Japanese soldiers because many of them hailed from Gifu Prefecture in Japan.
Lots of savage fighting here. A composite battalion of Japanese were effectively wiped out here. And the people of the village here, as they do their day's activity, they're always finding remains. This isn't the first set of remains you've found. Over the last 20 years, how many sets of remains do you think you've found here?
Yeah, more than 1,000 bones.
More than 1,000, goodness me, yeah.
Let's see what we've got here.
The remains are usually identified by dog tags or army equipment, such as helmets and munitions.
Okay, what have we got here, Peter? Now there's a bone. I can see some bones.
The Japanese buried their dead in a north-south direction, a traditional burial custom.
Japanese star.
When the remains of Japanese soldiers are found, the Japanese authorities have them cremated at a memorial on Guadalcanal, and the ashes are returned to family members in Japan.
Today we plan to take a tour around the island with John Ennis to point out all the areas of importance during World War II. The reason we're taking this tour is to give us more of an appreciation as to what happened on land in order to give us a better appreciation for the wrecks that we're diving on and to show the importance of how these wrecks were tied into the land battles.
I think what those guys went through in 1942 to both take and hold this island and how pivotal that was. So to come halfway around the world and see this firsthand and be walking through history it's very moving.
These 2 tables are full of items that the locals find as they do their normal daily routine, doing their gardens. They'll find lots and lots of items. They put these on a table for us to come along and have a look at. And it's a potpourri of stuff. You've got helmets, some American. Some of the Americans were still using World War I equipment, so some of them wore this. Yeah. However, I believe this was worn by the Solomon Island Scouts. Yeah. They were using British equipment. Mm-hmm. 30 caliber machine guns, American. This is a Japanese mortar. You can throw a grenade so far, and the mortar goes a bit further. Well, they had an intermediate weapon, but it looked like a salt shaker. You know, it's got that. Yeah. They had almost a poem of your life expectancy. If you were on Guadalcanal, you were going to live for 30 days. If you couldn't blink, you had an hour. Where we are now is Hill 27, and this was a significant hill because when the Americans took this hill, they had the Gifu surrounded. And they then resisted 5 counterattacks of the Japanese trying to win back the hill. They successfully resisted the Japanese. Come dusk, they then withdrew, the Americans, to a more easily defended night position and allowed the Japanese to come onto the hill, but they then called in the artillery from the Guadalcanal. And so nothing could live on the hill with the artillery. Next morning, the Americans came back, occupied their positions with no opposition, and then formed a line and they encircled the Gifu. But still the Gifu hung in there from the 2nd until the 22nd of January, despite being bombed, shelled, and attacked from the side. They refused to give in. And they've been offered surrender by the Americans. They said, we can't do that. They've been ordered to withdraw. They said, we can't leave the dead. They opted to go do this attack where those huts are, which was the strongest part of the American line. They didn't intend to get away. And 4 of them were taken prisoner unconscious. So they were the survivors of that battalion of about 800 men.
Being in the place, talking about taking a particular hill or sitting in the foxhole of either a Japanese or an American soldier and really picturing being there is just a really special experience that I believe has changed every member in the team for the better.
The team gets ready for their last day of diving the USS Atlanta.
When I pitched this project almost 3 years ago, it was a distant dream, and to see it come to an end now is going to be quite emotional.
Wrecks are very unpredictable. You can miss them, the wrecks can be less than you expected, but this is like really fantastic wreck, one of the best wrecks I've ever seen.
The coolest thing with a wreck dive like this is that you never know what you're gonna see. Every few meters you move, you find something else. It's kind of surprising to get on there and see the actual forces hitting the wreck when it was damaged by gunfire, but also the damage that it took when it fell down to seabed.
The wreck is in amazing condition considering the amount of damage it received during the battle. Both funnels are still there. And these funnels were made from stainless steel, and they're both in extremely good condition lying in the sand. Around the bridge area there are these quite unusual cabinets. We're not really sure what they are as of yet. That was pretty cool to see, considering the amount of damage that's on the actual bridge itself. It received a lot of hits, and a few of these cabinets are still perfectly intact. On dives to such depths, it takes a long time to come back to the surface to remove all this gas out of your system. So as a result, we're looking at another few hours.
How was it?
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that this project has been very successful. We have been diving to quite extreme depth. We have done long exposures down at the wreck. We have seen a lot of this wreck that nobody else has seen before. We have had experience of a lifetime as wreck divers.
Before heading back home, the team visits one last World War II site on the island.
This area is about a 1-hour drive south of Honiara, and behind me you can see some of the amphibious landing crafts which the American Marines used to come ashore from the beach just over here. You can see the remains of all these landing craft. Their objective in landing here was primarily to move up towards the airfield, which is not far from here, it's just a little bit north. So by coming in here south of the airport in order to move in to try to claim the airfield is the reason why these landing craft are here.
After all we've accomplished this week, there's a tremendous sense of personal accomplishment, and I think all of us have a lot to be proud of.
It really makes me grateful for all the people that made it come together. That was very special and will have a lasting influence on all of the team members.
We're here to visit Mr. Ed Huddleston, who was a survivor aboard the USS Atlanta. It's important to meet with the vets. The fact that not many of these people will be around much longer, you know, the generation is starting to pass on. It's very important to at least try to get personal recollections from those that were there. We're here also with Gwen Blau, whose father has served aboard the Atlanta. Gwen has a very detailed record of her father's service during the Navy, so that should be very interesting to just exchange stories and experiences.
My father was Glenn Rogers, and he was the mail clerk on the Atlanta. And probably when you got your mail, you probably ran into him. Does that face look familiar?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but that was a picture of my dad. Maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah, he was in the same division I was, I'm pretty sure.
His station was right behind your station.
Okay, too.
Right. He was in the upper handling room of the turret. And my uncle was in the magazine. My uncle, Eddie Moore, was in the magazine that fed the turret too.
Oh my gosh.
The way that it was told to me was that after the torpedo hit, everybody in the magazine wanted to evacuate and head up. And he stood by the door with a big wrench because he wanted everybody had to stay at the battle station. This was Eddie Moore.
Yeah. He's familiar.
So you were part of the team that helped scuttle the ship.
We couldn't maneuver with our anchor chain down. Our mainmast laying over in the water, you know, dragging, and nothing could tow us, you know, for much. And we built this demolition charge and put it in the best spot to send it down. And it was a heartbreaking experience. No, so much of it is still with me, so much of it's gone.
Meeting Mr. Huddleston and hearing some of his stories and knowing that he was on the same ship with my dad, and they shared a lot of the same experiences, even though they may not have known each other. It's been really an outstanding experience.
I think the people of that generation, especially what Mr. Huddleston went through, or what our parents went through, they're true heroes.
My dad grew up an orphan. And when he entered the Navy, to him, the ship was his home. His shipmates were like a band of brothers. When he lost the Atlanta, he couldn't look back because that was his home that was being detonated. And those were his brothers that he lost. And to have a connection this 69 years after the fact with the offspring of his brothers is like being with family.
Shortly after returning to the United States, dive team member Casey McKinley visits one of the USS Atlanta veterans.
We are in Atlanta, Georgia today. Don Edwards is joining us. We're both going to meet Mr. Clifford Dunaway, who served on Atlanta and probably has some very interesting stories to share with us.
Sir, how are you?
Mr. Dunaway, can you point to where you served on the Atlanta?
Yes, this gun turret right here, I practically lived in and around that gun turret from the time the ship was commissioned until she was sunk.
Did you also serve in that gun turret during the Battle of Midway?
Oh, yeah. I was on the right-hand gun, and I was standing there working my arms, picking my knees up, turning round and round to steady myself, because I was scared to death.
Mr. Dunaway, did you lose any good friends during the battle?
Close friends. Guys that I knew, I played cards with, I ate with them.
Casey shows Mr. Dunaway and his family the video footage of the USS Atlanta that was filmed during the recent expedition.
What were some of your feelings when you saw the video footage?
It was very disturbing. Very disturbing. If some of my shipmates had been sitting here with me, we could talk and discuss things, and I'd been okay. You guys have done a wonderful job going down there and diving on it like you did.
I still wouldn't have had the complete picture without coming here and talking to you.
You guys sure added a lot to my knowledge. See, that's been, what, about 66 or 7 years ago. But there was a lot of bodies left on that ship. And you just do what you're supposed to do and do it the best you can. That's just war.